When writing a fictional story, one obstacle that almost everyone eventually runs into is world building. Depending on the kind of story, it can be the most daunting thing. So today, that's exactly what we're gonna go over. This is How to Write, a series where we use popular anime and manga as a basis to discuss how to write different aspects of a story. And by the end of this video, you'll know the 3 major steps needed to create a compelling world and how to go about implementing them, with the last one being the absolute most important one. The first step we need to go over is figuring out what kind of world you are going to make. Because every fictional world exists on something of a spectrum, ranging from the entirely mundane to the completely fantastical, but you can generally narrow it down to 3 distinct types. Our world, a constructed reality, or the third option that exists between these two, which is something that I like to call altered reality. Now, I am going to address how world building applies to stories that take place in the real world later in this video, so right now we'll focus on the latter two. A constructed reality, or a completely fictional world, is probably what most people clicked on the video to hear about, so I'll address it first, and it's no easy task. If you've ever tried to make a completely fictional world, then I'm sure you've put a lot of thought into what the world looks like, what the map looks like, what the climate is like, what the politics there are. And don't get me wrong, it's good to think about these things. To have a definitive picture of your world is vital to bringing it to life. But it's not what makes good world building. When you're starting from scratch and just making a whole fictional world, it's very easy to get caught up in the superficial details because we think they're cool. But what matters is the moving pieces. By moving pieces, I mean any character, faction, or group that has its own plot-relevant goals or motivations. In terms of world building, this is relevant to the overall direction the world is headed. A good example of this is in One Piece. As an anime channel talking about world building, I kinda have to talk about One Piece. It's mandatory at this point, fellas, but this is the best mainstream example of what I'm talking about. Because yes, Oda is really creative with the diversity of locations and all the neat stuff he's put on this little world map, but that's not what makes One Piece's world building good. It's all the moving pieces. The One Piece world is full of different factions, from all the different pirate crews like the Yonko, to the Marines, to the world government, to the Revolutionary Army. All of these groups have very distinct motivations and goals, along with an important dynamic with every other major faction. And these dynamics can quickly change, alliances can happen, or they can break apart. That's why these are called moving pieces, and that's because the world is also subject to change for interesting developments. Other examples of this important world-building principle would be Magi, Hunter x Hunter, or Fullmetal Alchemist. But you're probably wondering how you even go about that, because essentially all I've told you is that world building is more complicated than it looks. So how does a person create these complex webs? The trick is to start at a single spot. It can be any aspect of your story. Let's say that you have a strong idea of what your main character is about. Well, what struggles do you want them to face? Does the culture of the world they live in somehow contribute to that struggle? Or maybe it's a physical struggle against some monstrous force. Well, what qualities do these monsters have? Okay, where would they come from that might cause them to have those qualities? What impact do these monsters have on the culture that they threaten? I want to point out that those questions can be asked and answered in any order. It doesn't matter how you come to the conclusions that you do, as long as every aspect of your world naturally builds off each other. That's the most vital thing. So what about the second option, altered reality? This lies somewhere between the real world and the constructed one. Popular examples would be Tokyo Ghoul, My Hero Academia, Chainsaw Man, Demon Slayer, etc. It basically takes the real world and just throws some fantastical element into it, and then it asks an interesting question. What would the world be like if that was the case? In most of these stories, these fantastical elements are in the form of a monster that introduces conflict. Well, how would human beings respond to these otherworldly threats? The very basic observation would be the existence of organizations that are in place to do specifically that, but there's a lot more than that. Ultimately, what makes this kind of world interesting is how it differs from our own. Really lean into that and show those those differences. My Hero Academia is a very good example of going all in on this. What would happen if most people started being born with superpowers? That's an interesting question, and one that MHA answers by going into celebrity culture, the school system, ideological conflicts, discrimination, even the clothing industry. The degree to which it does these things varies from casual mentions to entire plot lines, but just about every aspect of culture is mentioned. I think it's by far the most impressive aspect of the series, how genuinely well thought out the world is. With a totally fictional world, I described the process as making a web with interconnected points. In the case of an altered reality, that principle can apply as the story is written, but since you're using the real world as a base template, it's more about thinking, how does this new mechanic impact these different things? That being said, not every aspect needs to be explored to the same degree, and this brings us to step 2. Step 2 is probably what most people think of when it comes to world building, the world itself. My advice for it is actually pretty broad. I have no way of knowing what kind of story you would want to tell and what world that would be in. That's ultimately up to you, but when deciding the physical and temporal dimensions of your world, you need to ask yourself one thing: why? Stories aren't like the real world, locations exist with purpose. Star Wars has entire galactic conflicts and you won't see most planets. Why? Because most of them don't matter to the story. The scale of a story is just an illusion to suit the narrative. Let's take a look at Full Metal Alchemist. You might not remember, but there's this whole other country called Drachma. Throughout the story, we never really go there. All we know is that it has a shaky relationship with Amestris, the main location of the story. That's all we need to know to understand the conflict in the series. A great deal of world building is just knowing whether and when to give information. Then again, not everything should be relegated to obscurity. Look at Hunter x Hunter. At the very end of the anime, we get teased on this idea of the Dark Continent, a vastly unexplored land of incredible danger. In that case, when you build something up like that, yeah, you kinda wanna see it, and we just might in the manga, so that'll be cool. So it's not just when you give information to audiences, but how. You don't want auxiliary world building to be mistaken for build-up to something in the plot. Like I said, I'm not going to give any hard rules because I want everyone to let their imaginations run wild. So yeah, I'm giving these restrictions to help with how to think about world building, but never forget to be creative. Just practice restraint and be careful about how you present the world you create. Lastly, the third step you have to understand is the small stuff. Well, it's less of a step and more something to keep in mind. And I saved this for last because without this, no amount of cool details, lore, or anything else is gonna matter. Because when you think of world building, you probably think of big fantasy worlds or futuristic sci-fi settings. Maybe you're thinking of smaller scale things like showing an exotic location, but it's so much more than that. Because world building exists in every piece of media that you have ever consumed. Even stories that take place in our own world have world building. Imagine for a moment writing a story in our own world, your own home city or town, and really think about how you would write that. How would the buildings be portrayed? How would people talk? What areas are getting the most focus? Because ultimately it's impossible for us to truly reflect reality in writing. We're limited by our perceptions. The most we can do is impart our views of these things. Like if you were to write a legal drama, for instance, yeah, you can do all this research on how a legal system works and get all your facts straight. But at the end of the day, you'll never get it perfect. You'll only be providing a reflection of how you understand that legal system. Without even realizing it, we construct our understanding of our world in our heads every day. Whether we're using fiction or reality, when we construct fictional worlds, we're using our understanding of these things to inform our designs. And because of that, it really is all in the details. World building exists in every scene, whether you intend it or not, because people are constantly living in that world, a product of its functions. So if you take nothing else from this video, remember this. A world is not some separate aspect of a story. It is deeply tied to every aspect of storytelling. Plot and characters both impact and are impacted by it. So when you write a world, it's fine to let your imagination run wild and have fun with it, but never forget the little moments, the details that truly make a world feel alive.